Good morning, afternoon, evening, or night to everyone. Let's begin with a question. It might sound simple to you at first, but I pray you to think about it. Can the work of passionate fans ever outshine the original? And now, let's get started. I'm a big fan of role-playing games, also known as RPGs. The reason is simple. Because RPGs often offer captivating worlds filled with rich history, well-written characters, and fascinating storylines. This type of game allows me to dive into these worlds and experience unique adventures that I can only dream of in real life. Over the past 30 years, a lot of RPGs have been released, but there was always a game that served as something of an example for the others, and after some time, someone managed to surpass it. For example, one of the first text-based RPGs was Rogue. Looking back, Moria and NetHack were created as successors that outshined their predecessor. I think most people haven't even heard of the Ultima series, yet the first part, Ultima: The First Age of Darkness, made a significant breakthrough in graphics. You could even say that the first Ultima became a distant ancestor of what would later be known as isometric RPGs. Another game from the Ultima series, Ultima Underworld: The Stygian Abyss, took things even further. It featured a fully 3D environment, a first-person perspective, and real-time combat, as opposed to the text-based and turn-based system used before. All subsequent 3D RPGs trace their origins back to this. The Elder Scrolls Arena, Deus Ex, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, Gothic, and many others. All these games managed to surpass Ultima's success in their own way, so much so that today, almost no one remembers or knows about it. A prime example from my favorite genre fantasy RPGs with a D&D system is Dragon Age Origins. A classic old-school RPG in a new guise, though with a simplified pseudo-D&D system. For a long time, it was considered the gold standard, the benchmark for how things should be done. Until last year, when Baldur's Gate 3 by Larian was released. Yes, I know there are still people who consider Dragon Age the ideal, and I agree the story in Dragon Age is definitely a cut above what's in Baldur's Gate. But we have to acknowledge that Larian has taken things to a new level. No matter how much some might dislike it, this is what future games in this genre will look like. At the very least, they'll be looking to Baldur's Gate for inspiration. But there is one RPG, one game that became a phenomenon. A game whose unique qualities no one has been able to replicate despite vast resources and desire. Ironically, even the original creators couldn't come close to recreating the phenomenon of that game, let alone repeat it. And as some of you might have already guessed, I'm talking about the great, terrifying, and mighty Skyrim. I'm fully aware that besides Skyrim's massive fanbase, it also has the largest number of, let's say, detractors. I personally know two people who share my passion for RPGs, but don't consider Skyrim a good RPG. In short, their arguments can be boiled down to two main points. First, Skyrim lacks meaningful choices that impact the story, making the game less engaging. And second, the game mechanics. For example, character development in Skyrim is overly simplified, and interaction with NPCs is lacking compared to more traditional RPGs. This makes the game less engaging due to the absence of emotional attachment to the characters. The only exception is Serana, as she was given a character arc. Among those who don't like Skyrim, there's also a group of people who enjoy Morrowind or Oblivion, or even both, but don't like Skyrim. It either doesn't resonate with them, or they see the fifth installment as a stagnation of the series. They believe the combat system, or the NPC's AI in the previous games was better, and therefore, they consider the fifth game a failure. And it's hard to argue with the above. These points are valid, and even if I wanted to, I couldn't refute them. Moreover, I'd add another drawback to Skyrim, a very low level of direction, especially in dialogues. The only somewhat cinematic scene in the game can be seen right at the beginning, with Alduin's arrival. This aspect, by the way, applies to the entire Elder Scrolls series, but in Morrowind there were, let's call them, thematic dialogue branches. For those who haven't played it, you could discuss quests, the world's lore, and even the ongoing events with NPCs. Asking the same question to two different characters could yield 2 or even 3 different responses. For example, the prophecy of the Nerevarine. It was interesting to explore the mythology surrounding the tribunal, the politics, and the interactions between the great houses of Vardenfell through dialogue. As for Oblivion, well, there was an attempt to add more direction to the dialogues, but it was done so poorly and comically at times that years later, this flaw is now forgiven.
Can you tell me where Armand Kristoff is hiding?
I'm in hiding from the Imperial Watch.
But Skyrim isn't loved for those reasons. Yes, it undoubtedly has a lot of flaws, but it became what it is for entirely different reasons. Skyrim's uniqueness lies in its atmosphere and its ability to immerse players in its world. I call this the Skyrim Syndrome. This phenomenon has been observed among a huge number of players for years. How does it look like? As I mentioned, Skyrim has a rather clunky combat system, there's hardly any role-playing element, and the story is just so-so. In my opinion, both Morrowind and Oblivion have much better written stories. And you've seen it all before. You have finally awake 15 or 20 times already. The guild questlines are completed, and the civil war between the Stormcloaks and the Imperials is over. That's it, it's over. You delete the game. But then a month passes, maybe two, half a year. And suddenly, you get this strange urge. Should I play Skyrim again? You resist it for a while, but then you stumble upon some video related to the game on YouTube. The next evening, you give in, download the game, and start all over again. After a week of playing, you tell yourself, enough, I'm never coming back here, and Skyrim again gets deleted. But then a month passes, maybe two, half a year, and that thought creeps into your head again. Should I reinstall Skyrim? And you hold out, but as usual, all it takes is hearing the game's soundtrack, and you realize,
Fuck.
and then the cycle starts all over again. And this craziness isn't just with me. After all those jokes about buying yet another Skyrim re-release come from the fact that people have been buying the same game for over 10 years. For some reason, something keeps pulling them back time and time again, and that is the true uniqueness of Skyrim that no one has been able to replicate to this day. And it's hard to pinpoint what exactly causes this effect. Is it the Nordic setting? Is it Jeremy Soul's music, which sounds like he sold his soul to create it? Or maybe it's because Skyrim isn't really a full-fledged RPG, but more of a sandbox where you entertain yourself? I don't know. But I believe the players themselves played a part in cementing this phenomenon by creating mod after mod, refining Skyrim to perfection. And no matter how many times people declare Skyrim dead or say its time has passed, it remains one of the best RPGs out there. It's especially amusing to me when I hear the tired complaint. But the engine is 20 years old, it's outdated, everything's on crutches, the graphics are old, everything's janky, and then you see something like this.
Got some good pieces out here if you're looking to buy. More inside.
What have you got for sale?
Take a look.
Those thieves must be mad hiding out there. Those old crypts are filled with nothing but traps, trolls, and who knows what else.
And now, it's time to get to the point. This summer, for some personal reasons, I felt the urge to roam the familiar landscapes of Skyrim once again. I set aside some time and asked my brother to download the game and install a couple dozen mods of his choosing, and he said, "There's one mod I want you to try." At first I resisted, saying I didn't want to play some fan-made mod, I wanted Skyrim, but he was surprisingly persistent, so I gave it a shot. And you know, I'm sure that in 6 months, maybe a year, that silly thought will pop into my head again. But this time, it won't be to return to Skyrim, but to a fan-made mod known as Enderal. I want to make a brief aside and clarify a few things. First, calling Enderal a modification for Skyrim isn't entirely accurate. You could just as well say that Fallout New Vegas by Obsidian is a modification of Fallout 3 by Bethesda. Such a statement is incorrect. New Vegas is a fully fledged standalone game, which yes, is built on the engine and assets of Fallout 3. The same goes for Enderal. It's not just a fan-made mod, it's a completely separate game, built from the ground up, though using Skyrim's engine and assets. The only difference between Enderal and New Vegas is that the latter doesn't require Fallout 3 to run, whereas Enderal needs the original Skyrim to be installed. So, technically, you could call Enderal a modification. When I refer to Enderal as a fan-made mod later on, you should understand what I mean by this term. Second, I really liked Enderal, and the purpose of this video is to get people who like me, enjoy Skyrim but may not have heard of this mod, interested in playing Enderal. This also applies to fans of Morrowind or Oblivion who didn't quite enjoy Skyrim, and of course, anyone else who stumbled across this video. And to avoid spoiling the experience of a first playthrough, I will speak in general terms and try to be vague. I'll do my best to talk about specific things, but without making it so that playing Enderal becomes pointless after watching this video. So, to those who have already played Enderal, please don't ask or comment why I didn't mention this or that. I'll start with the most important thing, the atmosphere and immersion. While Skyrim's introduction is slow-paced and in some ways cozy, Enderal hit me with a flood of emotions right from the start. Where am I? Who's that? What's going on? These were the kind of thoughts I had in the first few minutes. Then, without giving me time to catch my breath, Enderal flipped the tone and mood 180 degrees. The opening cinematic, in my opinion, did a fantastic job of explaining the setup and what's happening in just a couple of minutes. But just when I thought I had everything figured out, another event took place, leaving me with more questions like, who was that? And then another unexpected twist, and another.
Do something, damn it!
The first conversation with a character named Jesper, who tried to answer my questions, only deepened my interest in what was happening. On my way to the village of Riverville, I noticed a distant castle that reminded me somewhat of Solitude, and I thought, that's probably the city of Ark that Jesper mentioned. As I approached Riverville, I was stopped by a guy named Silas who asked for help finding a box. Okay, I'm not far from here, I thought, might as well do the quest. But then I noticed that the usual quest markers telling me exactly where to go weren't there. So I had to reread the note for clues about what to do. I'm sure Morrowind fans will think, the old school approach, but actually not quite. Without giving too much away, there are a few times when you'll need to rely on descriptions instead of map markers, but in most cases, the quests are more like Skyrim than Morrowind. Nevertheless, this kind of quest design makes you think and explore your surroundings, which in turn draws you further into the game. Finally, Riverville. And the first long quest, helping Mayor Jugar and his wife, turned into a full-blown investigation. And this was when I realized that the creators of Enderal are incredibly talented people. Because despite Skyrim's engine not being designed for more advanced directing, thanks to the sound and visual effects, voice acting, and strong storytelling, the atmosphere really started to get to me.
I am sure, Nero, that's the problem. Otherwise I wouldn't say all this, would I?
To compare, the first long quest most players will encounter in Skyrim is returning the Golden Claw to the shopkeeper in Riverwood, and that quest is nowhere near the same level of depth as Enderal's first major quest. After meeting up with Jesper again, the two of us set off for Ark, and very soon I realized that the castle I had seen earlier wasn't Ark after all. So the question, what is it then, remained unanswered for the time being. After crossing a mountain pass, we completed another strange and atypical, but in a way, amusing quest. And as we descended into the forest and stepped into a clearing, I finally saw the outline of the Ark in the distance. This was the moment, during my first playthrough, when I noticed it was already daylight outside. But Enderal, with its level of detail and freshness, had quietly rekindled a feeling I hadn't experienced since Skyrim, back when I first laid eyes on Whiterun. And instead of going to bed, I made myself a cup of coffee and kept playing.
And here we are. Welcome to Ark.
If you remember the feeling of stepping into Whiterun for the first time, multiply that by 3. There's nothing even remotely similar to Ark in any of the Elder Scrolls games. Yes, Ark is the only large city in Enderal, but to give you an idea of its scale, it's roughly the size of Whiterun, Solitude, Riften, Markarth, and Windhelm combined. It's huge. And the most important thing is that as you walk through Ark's streets for the first time, you get completely immersed in its atmosphere. Actually, when it comes to immersion and atmosphere in games, it all comes down to the small details, and if I still had any doubts about which was better, Skyrim or Enderal, those thoughts soon vanished. While the sense of nature, snowy regions, or forests in Skyrim and Enderal feels somewhat similar, the urban atmosphere in Enderal, in my opinion, is on a whole different level. And it's hard to put into words. I could say, you're walking down the street, and you see posters on the walls, stop to read them, a couple of kids run by, somewhere in the background, a terrible poet is reciting verses, and you catch fragments of conversations about some order and the Sun Temple, but that won't convey the emotions I'm talking about. And I haven't even mentioned the Undercity yet. Ark is divided into districts, but also into Upper and Lower City. For a while, I stuck to exploring just the districts in the Upper City. I saw the signposts for fast travel here and there, but at first I wanted to explore Ark the old-fashioned way. After I made it to the Sun Temple with Jesper, I decided to take a break from the main storyline. Heading to the foreign quarter, I met a merchant named Milbert, who needed help with his sister. According to him, she was in a tavern in the Lower City. I remember thinking to myself during my first playthrough, a tavern in the Lower City? Interesting. It's interesting, because I had imagined the Undercity as something like the sewers beneath Riften, or at most, the Thieves' Guild hideout. But I was in for a surprise when I saw this. The Lower City is a literal maze. I don't have a bad sense of direction, but even after playing through the game twice, I still managed to get lost in some areas. Like, which path in the market leads to the top it? I have no idea. The Undercity is filled with poverty and ruin. It's home to vagabonds, bandits, glimmer dust addicts, which is basically their version of heroin or skooma, and just poor people who couldn't make it in Ark. Like the Upper City, the Undercity is divided into districts. The tavern I was looking for is in the main cavern. If you pass through a small tunnel, you come to the residential barracks. By the way, here's another example of the city's scale. There's a brothel in this area called the Silver Cloud, and it's funny because I stumbled upon it only near the end of the game, even though I'd been in the barracks area a dozen times. If you go even further, you'll find a marketplace with merchants and fences selling stolen goods. The Undercity even has its own underground fighting arena. And all of this isn't just decoration for the sake of atmosphere. There are multiple unique quests down here. Just the storyline of the Rolata cult alone is worth mentioning. And what I find absolutely brilliant is that this stark contrast doesn't break the logic of the world. You might wonder, how can the Undercity exist with its own laws in Ark, a city ruled by a powerful holy order? Why haven't they or the city guard cleaned it up? It seems illogical, but the thing is, if you listen carefully to the dialogues, read the books, and pay attention to the surroundings, the pieces start to come together, and it all makes sense. Thanks to those small details, even if some seem insignificant at first glance, it all becomes coherent, and that's extremely important, not just in games, because you can only get immersed in a fictional world and feel its mood when you believe in what's happening. When the third cup of coffee stopped having any sort of energizing effect, I finally dragged myself to bed with numb legs and a few other body parts. But the moment I woke up, the first thing I did was dive straight back into Enderal, losing myself in the game for another whole day. So, as you can tell from what I've said so far, Enderal's atmosphere and immersion are just as captivating as Skyrim's. Of course, someone else might have a completely different first impression, because there is nothing forcing you to immediately go with just Bar to Ark. Just like in Skyrim, you are not required to rush to Whiterun. However, even if a player heads in the opposite direction, say toward Markarth, they still get swept up in the magic of Skyrim, and Enderal works much the same way. Even though Enderal's map is about 2, maybe 3 times smaller than Skyrim's, the developers managed to fit in several unique regions, each with its own flavor. Here's what we've got. First is the area around Ark, also known as the Heartlands. Second is the Sun Coast, a temperate region on the western part of the continent. Third is the Western Cliffs, a region south of Ark where, according to rumors, you might spot a wild dragon flying overhead. And here we have the Farmer's Coast, a small but crucial part of Enderal. Golden Forest and the Wellwatch Fortress occupy a large chunk of the eastern continent. If you're a fan of autumn landscapes, you will love it here. The southeast part of Enderal covers the Powder Desert. Here you can also find a settlement called Duneville, Thalgard, an abandoned land that never recovered from a disaster known as the Sunstone Cataclysm. According to legend, anyone who ventures there without magical protection risks losing their mind. The Whisperwood, a small area of dense forest. Once vibrant, it's now dead and barren, devastated by a deadly fungal plague. Just north of Whisperwood is the Dark Valley, a dangerous area filled mostly with undead and wisp creatures. Crystal Forest, which stands out from the surrounding areas with its trees that have a strange violet hue, and everything there is steeped in magical energy. And finally, my personal favorite, the Frostcliff Mountains, an area considered dangerous but a popular spot for hunters, adventurers, and Skyrim's lovers. This variety makes exploring Enderal incredibly exciting, often without you even realizing it. For example, while running along the shores of the Heartlands, I spotted a lighthouse in the distance with a ship docked nearby. Curiosity got the better of me. What's there? A dungeon? A settlement like Riverville? So I made a little detour and found a small harbor where I heard rumors of a strange murder to the east, somewhere in Dunville. What's Dunville? What's this murder? Is it an interesting quest? I didn't know, so I kept going east. That led me into the Powder Desert, then north to Golden Forest, and so on. Each region has numerous dungeons, and sometimes you stumble across quests or random encounters. One that stood out was a quest about a scholar trying to find a cure for red madness. On the surface, nothing too special, but I enjoyed following his trail, finding pages from his journal, and learning what happened to him. And what is even more impressive is that the creators of Enderal didn't just pack in these regions, they also provided logical explanations for each one's existence. Every area has lore to explain why it became what it is. They didn't just say, I'm the creator, and this is how I see it. And questions like, why is it like this, aren't answered with just because magic. For example, Whisperwood became what it is due to failed experiments with fungal spores at Fortress Fogwatch, which is covered in a separate quest called the Dreary Field. Or take the Crystal Forest, which looks completely different even compared to the Dark Valley or Frostcliff Mountains. Why are crystals sprouting from the ground exactly here, and why are there so many aggressive elementals? You will get answers in one of the main story quests. The backstory of Thalgard can be pieced together from books or through dialogue with certain characters, and these explanations are great. It all ties back to what I mentioned earlier, those small details. You might think that this level of detail isn't essential, but in reality, this is exactly what makes any fictional world feel more alive and believable. Wrapping up the topic of atmosphere and immersion in Enderal, I want to talk about the music. There's a saying that a picture painted by a talented artist is worth 1,000 words, but I'd say that a musical composition by a brilliant composer is worth 1,000 pictures. That's not my quote, but I fully agree with it. Music holds immense power to create vivid imagery and stir deep emotions in a person. Unlike visual art, which presents the viewer with a concrete image, melodies and sound effects evoke feelings, memories, and associations that paint a unique picture in each person's mind. In the end, music is something universally understood, capable of touching people regardless of their views, beliefs, language, or culture. Jeremy Soule is absolute genius. Icewind Dale, Harry Potter, Morrowind, Neverwinter Nights, Knights of the Old Republic, Company of Heroes, Oblivion, Guild Wars. I still listen to the soundtracks from these games, and I'm not alone. On YouTube, there are dozens of compilations of his music in various mixes. As for Skyrim, his ambient tracks likely played a key role in creating the phenomenon I've been discussing. Just take his last track for the game, Wind Guide You. That melody captures the very essence of Skyrim. When you listen to it, it feels like you've truly been there, that you've seen the frosty mountains near Dawnstar, walked through the forests around Riften. The final notes make me feel like I have lived a long life. The closing seconds feel like they are summing up the journey. Your heartbeat slows and life gradually fades away, but you are at peace, and like a true Nord, your final thoughts are of home. That's the kind of unusual, even tragic emotions this melody evokes in me. The thing is, not every artist can create a masterpiece, and not every composer can write something like that. For even one composition to be this powerful, I'm sure half the people in the music industry would sell their souls without hesitation. Think about it. Would Skyrim be what it is if it had a different composer, or Oblivion, or Morrowind? Well, perhaps, or perhaps not. But what I do know is that if you like ambient tracks as much as I do, and you're just as sensitive to music, get ready to add some new favorites to your collection. Because the music in Enderal is stunning. Not just excellent, absolutely stunning. 3 composers worked on Enderal's soundtrack. Individually, they might not match Jeremy Soule, but together, they definitely give him a run for his money. And I'm not joking or exaggerating. When I was just imagining this video, thinking about what I wanted to say and how I wanted it to look, I already knew exactly how I would cover the music, ambience, and sound effects in Enderal. And if you, like me, enjoyed wandering around Skyrim, soaking in the scenery and background music, then Enderal will offer you the same feelings. But the melodies aren't always meditative. Sometimes the soundtrack triggers entirely different thoughts. The first time I headed towards Thalgard, the Sunborn track was playing in the background. And the farther I went, the more I wondered, should I even be here yet? Am I too low level for this area and maybe I should come back later? But the ambient music was so beautiful. If I turned back toward Goldenforst, I'd interrupt it. So I kept going just to hear the track to the end, even though at that point I really was too low level for that location. I'm not sure who from Enderal's team was in charge of choosing the soundtracks and sound effects for specific moments in the game, but that person has a brilliant understanding of the importance of sound. They know exactly when to crank up the tension and when to highlight a key moment.
What the? Breathe. Just breathe.
I played through this quest at night, and it's at night, when no one's interrupting you, when you feel like it's just you and the game, that the impact of moments like these really hits hard, and in certain parts, I literally had chills running down my spine.
Didn't I tell you to? Or the name of the sun?
And don't go thinking, what understanding? Just put in some screams and you'll get the same effect, or slap some ambient music in the background and you're good to go. Anyone can do that. No, no, no. In Enderal, there are more than a few moments where the background is dead silent and all you hear are your own footsteps. No music, no sound effects or visual cues, but the feeling that something's watching you, the urge to get the hell out of there, builds with every second. Throw in some ambient music, and the effect would be completely different. And Enderal is full of moments like these. Whoever was in charge of the sound has a fantastic sense of balance and understanding. As someone who uses background music in my own videos to complement the narrative and set a mood for the listener, I've got a lot to learn from people like that. And finally, for those of you who've played Skyrim, how many of you paid attention to the bard songs? To be honest, I didn't. Well, yeah, sure, I remember the song about Ragnar the Red, but I never actually stopped to listen to it. And if you were like me, then get ready to spend a bit more time in Enderal's taverns. While running through the regions of Enderal, I ended up at the Frostcliff Tavern. I went inside, saw two characters having a conversation, and realized it was a quest. I walked up, and from there it was pretty standard stuff. The dialogue with a character named Esme went on for quite a while, and I never figured out how to play the local version of Gwent, so when she suggested continuing the conversation outside at her camp, I was happy to oblige. But then, in the background, I heard a song.
Song of gods, any lute and contraband were passing through her hands. Her heart was empty, cold and sore, yet she craved for more and more. So little virtue left in her and nothing left to lose.
I spent the next half an hour in that tavern, ordering song after song, just standing there and listening. And I felt a bit sad then, because I think that many players, even those who've already completed Enderal, might have completely missed these songs, never hearing them even once. Not only are they beautifully written, but also because each bard song is performed by different people. In Ark's Noble Quarter Tavern, the bard is a man. At the Red Ox, it's a woman. At Frostcliff Tavern, there's also a female bard, but her singing style is different. I could be wrong, but I think for every tavern, and there are about 6 or 7 in the game, they chose a unique performer. Each one sang their own original song, and a few shared ones in their own way. So the same melody will sound different depending on where you hear it. You might wonder, why go to so much trouble? Why not just use one singer for all of them? But to me, this really highlights how much the game's creators loved working on their project. They wanted to make everything as perfect as their resources allowed. I highly recommend that everyone watching this video, even if you never play Enderal, go on YouTube and find the song Winter Sky, performed by Lara Troutman. Listen to it. Even if you're as tough as nails, the song's lyrics will probably still get to you. Now that I've finished talking about the atmosphere and immersion in Skyrim and Enderal, let's dial down the drama a bit. One of the things I really liked about Enderal, and something I think it does better than Skyrim, is the quests. Sure, there are fewer of them compared to Skyrim, but at first, especially after arriving in Ark, you might feel the opposite, because your journal will be overflowing with new tasks. But the important thing is that most of these quests are on a higher level. Even the ones that seem like simple errands can turn into something much more interesting. Of course, don't expect every quest to be on the level of the suicide mission from Mass Effect 2. By interesting, I mean quests like A Night to Remember from Skyrim. If you played Skyrim, you probably remember that one. For those who didn't, it's about how a simple night of drinking at a tavern turns into a wild adventure. But what exactly happened during that night, your character doesn't remember because of all the alcohol. As you piece together the events of the night, it turns out the Dragonborn knows how to have a good time. Enderal has a lot more of these kinds of unusual quests. Enderal also features more non-linear quests. You often have to make choices, whether to do things one way or another. For example, there's a quest chain for the local merchant guild, the Golden Sickle. The first time I played, I chose one side, and during my second playthrough, I switched to the other. I can say that the final quests for the Golden Sickle play out very differently depending on your choice. Moreover, the outcome for all the characters involved will vary based on your decisions. But to be fair, I must admit that in about half the cases, your choices don't lead to any real consequences. For instance, I mentioned the quest related to the Whispering Forest earlier. At the end of that quest, you have a choice. Either risk spreading a fungal plague to nearby areas in order to try and find a cure, or quarantine the infected zone to keep it contained. Regardless of what you choose, you won't see the consequences of your decision later on. This can feel a bit underwhelming, but I think it's just not technically feasible to account for everything. But where non-linearity really stands out though, and where your choices will have definite consequences, is in the main story. Unlike Skyrim, Enderal has 3 different endings, 2 main ones and a secret one, and each of them leaves you with very different emotions. The world building in Enderal is also done much better than in Skyrim, and I'm not talking about the lore now, well, not entirely, I'm talking about something different. Early on in the game, during a conversation with a character named Jesper, one of the 2 main companions, he told me how, as a child, his family's estate was burned down by people who were enemies of his father. I usually pay close attention to dialogue, so I remembered this. A couple of days later, while I was running around in the Powder Desert, I stumbled upon a burnt estate. On the map, it's marked as Delvaric Estate, and I thought, wait a minute, isn't this the same estate Jesper was talking about? And turns out, yes, it was. Later in the game, you can even find a book written by Jesper's father. Reading it, you get an idea of who his father was, not just from Jesper's words, but also from what's conveyed in the book's pages. Then, there's Kalia, the other main companion in the game. After you're inducted into the Order, she will tell you about her past due to certain circumstances. She shares that her earliest memories are of a burnt village somewhere in the mountains. She doesn't remember where it was, but in Frostcliff Mountains, there is a place that matches her description. Along with other subtle clues, you can figure out that this is the village Kalia was talking about. And Enderal is full of these kinds of details. In Skyrim though, everything feels more isolated, or perhaps a better word would be disconnected. The only example of a connection between a character and a quest, or a character and a location that comes to mind is Cicero. You meet him outside Whiterun and can choose to help him fix his wagon or not. Then, when you do the Dark Brotherhood questline, you encounter him again, and it becomes clear where he was heading and what his strange cargo was. There might be more examples like this in Skyrim, but this is the only one I remember. In Enderal though, there are at least a dozen. Speaking of which, I have a recommendation. In Enderal, there's a series of books called The Butcher of Ark. It's a story, or better yet, an autobiography written by Jael, Atana's son. Before starting the questline involving the Ralata cult, I strongly recommend reading all 10 books in the series. Yes, it will take you about an hour of uninterrupted reading, and I've seen people on forums say that the books in Enderal are nothing more than filler. But honestly, I wish every game had filler like this. To give you an idea of the quality of writing, Google Account of an Unknown Traveler. It's a 3-part story. If you enjoyed reading Robinson Crusoe or The Last of the Mohicans as a kid, check it out. It'll take you about 20 to 30 minutes, and I'm sure after reading the first part, you'll immediately go looking for the second and third. It's really well done. At one point in the third part, I even felt a bit uncomfortable, because I could vividly imagine what was happening. Again, I will repeat, I highly recommend reading the Butcher of Ark series before starting the quest with Therail. You won't regret it. What also ties in with the world building, and probably already a boring topic for everyone about atmosphere and immersion, is how well the game conveys a sense of scale and vastness. As the story progresses, you will gradually notice more and more people infected with the Red Madness. In the second half of the game, after a particular plot twist, both key characters and side characters will comment on what's happening. As the story develops, they will have new dialogue. They'll frequently discuss events directly related to the central plot among themselves. And on one hand, these conversations reveal more about the characters, pushing their personal arcs towards specific conclusions, but on the other hand, these discussions are easy to miss. Without giving away spoilers, I somehow managed to miss a bunch of dialogues between Teela, the head of the Order, and Jorak, his close friend, during my first playthrough. Because of this, by the time I reached the end, I didn't fully understand why certain events unfolded the way they did. But in my second playthrough, I caught the dialogues I had missed earlier, and once I added them to the bigger picture, Jorak's motivations became much clearer. Apologies if I'm being vague here, but these events are tied to the central story, and I don't want to ruin anyone's first experience. If you play Enderal, you'll know what I'm talking about. Just keep in mind that it's worth paying attention to the background conversations. Because of this, even minor characters feel more alive, with their own relatable motivations and personal struggles. I can't recall a single moment in the game where I found myself asking, and what was his motivation? Where's logic? The characters are well written, whether they're part of the main cast or not. Like real people, they have both strengths and weaknesses, which makes them more believable. The voice acting is also top tier. The actors put a lot of emotion into their roles, which made the dialogues, and yes, even the static scenes typical of Skyrim's engine, more engaging. And the characters react to your choices, adding depth to your interactions with them. Yes, I'm talking about Enderal here, built on Skyrim, which didn't have anything like this, but Enderal does. I think the folks at Bethesda working on The Elder Scrolls 6 could definitely learn a thing or two from this game. I don't really want to talk much about the role-playing mechanics like character leveling, since it's not the most exciting aspect of Enderal in my opinion. In short, when it comes to combat mechanics, Enderal is still very much like Skyrim. The progression system has been drastically revamped, but I think it's for the better. Anyone familiar with the Elder Scrolls series will have no problem figuring it out, and for everyone else, it's pretty intuitive too. You won't find anything overly complex like D&D additions in Enderal. I'll just mention 3 things. First, Enderal doesn't have shouts like in Skyrim, but it does have abilities that are activated with the same button. These abilities have their own cooldown. So, if you assign these abilities to hotkeys 1, 2, 3, 4, you can use them one after another despite their individual cooldowns. Personally, I only figured this out toward the end of my first playthrough. Combine abilities from different classes and activate them using hotkeys to become stronger in combat. Second, play as a mage. I have mentioned in the Elden Ring video that I prefer warrior classes, but when I found a spellbook for a first tier spell early in the game, it sparked a new desire in me to explore and collect. I realized that I had never played a mage in Skyrim. I'd gone through the game with stealth, bows, swords, and shields, but never with magic, so why not try it, especially since it looked like magic would work a bit differently here. And I was right. Playing through the game a second time, I really felt the difference between playing as a mage versus a warrior. It was much harder and even boring at times to play as a warrior, especially in the early stages. Things do get better later on, as you acquire more active skills which add some variety, but still, playing as a mage was much more enjoyable and interesting. And third, don't set the difficulty above expert. Skyrim isn't known for balanced difficulty levels. There's really no point in playing on legendary difficulty because you end up chipping away at enemies for 5 minutes at a time. Even though Enderal's progression system is different, the combat system remains the same. Like in Skyrim, the difficulty levels aren't well balanced. So don't bother with it, especially if you're not using a mod that completely overhauls the combat system. Play on Adept, it's the most balanced option. Even then, you will still die dozens of times, and at certain points, you will have to use your wits and break a sweat. At the heart of any captivating story lies the hero's journey, whether internal or external. Enderal's plot is a great example of how, even if the core concepts are borrowed from other works, with the right approach, well-written dialogues, and properly placed emphasis, familiar stories can still draw you in and evoke strong emotions. Enderal's story has a depth that was sorely lacking in Skyrim. At first glance, the story might not seem particularly special. You play as the Chosen One, who is no different from other chosen heroes in other games, and get swept into a series of events where you will take on one of the central roles. But that's just on the surface. The game is packed with subtext and food for thought. In some ways, it's similar to Morrowind, where there isn't a single interpretation of the events. There are multiple sides to the conflict, each with its own perspective, and honestly, I couldn't say, if I were truly part of the story, which side I would sympathize with more. Another one of the story's strengths is the presence of connections. Two seemingly unrelated events may complement each other. For example, the quest, Our Mark on This World, which isn't part of the main story, can shed a little more light on one of the key characters. But again, it won't necessarily be some clear-cut fact, it's more like food for thought. The involvement of companions in the story also makes it more engaging. Whether you want to or not, you get invested in their personal journeys. Be it main characters, supporting ones, or even minor ones, you end up feeling for all of them in some way. Enderal reminded me a bit of Cyberpunk, which I recently finished, in the sense that no one gets a happy ending. Enderal's world is beautiful, and at first glance, it seems like a wonderful place, but it quickly becomes clear that it has a way of making everyone miserable and full of doubt. And that's all I'm going to say about Enderal's story. As someone who values the narrative above all else in games, I really enjoyed the story. To sum it up briefly, Skyrim is primarily about exploring the world. Enderal, on the other hand, puts the story front and center. The creators wanted above all to tell the story they came up with. Everything else I have talked about in this video simply enhances that narrative. I have been talking about Enderal for half an hour now, but you need to understand, all of this, it's only about 20, maybe 30% of what this mod really is. You could make a 5-hour video about Skyrim and Enderal, and even then, you'd still have to leave a lot out. The amount of work and talent the team behind Enderal put into this mod is hard to compare to anything else. The game world, companions, characters, both major and minor, the music, the depth of the lore, and the story itself. It is also intricate that it's difficult to convey the full experience. And to answer the question of whether Enderal, a fan-made mod, managed to surpass Skyrim, I would say yes. Enderal was made by fans and enthusiasts of their craft. In my opinion, this mod achieved something others haven't. Enderal was able to capture the same magic as Skyrim. It recreated that same illusion where a fictional world completely draws you in. I got lost in it just as deeply as I once did in Skyrim. Enderal made me dive into its world and experience unique adventures that I can only dream of in real life. I did my best to convey the essence of this game and share my impressions after finishing it. I will admit, I felt a bit sad knowing the story had come to an end. Recently, I had a similar feeling after finishing Cyberpunk, but the emotions from Enderal were much stronger. Maybe it's because Enderal and Skyrim share so much in common, and let's be honest, Skyrim is a unique game. And finally, I know there are people who don't really enjoy getting so immersed in games. After all, there is real life and plenty of other interesting things. To that I will say, let everyone decide for themselves. Personally, I'm glad for games that become like a dream, where it's hard to distinguish fiction from reality while you're in it, because my dreams are often much more interesting and exciting than the real world. You can play Enderal through Steam, as long as you own Skyrim, or by downloading and installing it from Nexus Mods. There shouldn't be any difficulties with installation, so I'm sure anyone interested in playing Enderal can handle it. And that's all for now. If you enjoyed the video, liking it and subscribing to the channel would be greatly appreciated, as it helps with the video's promotion and the channel's growth overall. And for now, I wish you all a good morning, day, evening, or night. Till next time.